from the state fair.
It's very close. Right.
Oh.
And Erin was first elected in 2006 and is a nurse and has a graduate degree in organizational leadership. So let's kick it off today. We have a long list of accomplishments. We could sit here. Ellen Anderson has them on her shirt right there, which is available for sale inside the booth, including investments at all levels of education, creating jobs. So I just want to touch and find out from you what are some of the highlights of those investments and how will they pay for years to come. Speaker Thiessen.
Well, the biggest investment that we made was in education, and really all across the board. And it's really 75% of the budget we put together, the increased budget we put together, went to schools. First time we've ever done early childhood education in Minnesota in a meaningful way. This fall, in about a week, all day, everyday kindergarten for every family in Minnesota. Save people about their average $2,500 a year that they had to pay for before. We froze college tuition, which again saved families about $2,500 who have kids in Minnesota universities. And then we put a lot more money into our K-12 system, but didn't only do that. We did it in a way that I think is really good reform, where instead of just having this single test at the end that really doesn't measure anything, we're having meaningful preparation starting in 7th and 8th grade so that people are either ready for a career or ready for college by the time they graduate, and there's time to actually prepare to get there. So I'm really excited by the progress we can make. And the reality is, it's something that has made Minnesota what it is. It's what makes us successful, and it's what Minnesotans want us to be focused on is education. And long term, it really is the key to our economic success. And when people are well educated, they can get really good paying jobs, and that's what keeps families together and moving forward and keeps our state moving forward. So I was excited about our accomplishments there.
There are so many things to talk about in addition to what is on Ellen's t-shirt. How are you doing? It's good to see you. Minnesota's in a much better place than we were 2 years ago or 4 years ago. And in part that is because of the hard work of the people of Minnesota. But the legislature that came into place after the 2012 election was really determined to focus on Minnesotans' priorities, and part of that was making sure we balanced the budget. And Speaker Thiessen talked a little bit about that, about the investment in education, and that's something that Minnesotans support across the state. Something that's less sexy but super important is the fact that we really did balance the budget, not just for 2 years, but for 4 years, and we paid back our schools. We borrowed, legislatures before us had borrowed from the schools. We paid them back. Minnesotans thought that was important. And we're seeing a surplus in the state's budget going forward. And that means that we can really, if we elect again a smart legislature, one that's focused on Minnesota and its future, it means that we can do some hard work planning for our future. And that's really the task before us with Governor Dayton, is to make sure we're thinking about what's in front of us in terms of the people who live here and where they live, and our economy and our future, and preparing for that. And it's hard to do that if you're thinking about the budget in just 2-year increments and scooting from deficit to deficit as had happened in 2011, 2012. So I'm excited about the future, but I'm counting on Minnesotans to make a good choice this fall. And I'm really glad you're here today so we can talk about that.
Erin, another accomplishment was increasing the minimum wage. Could you please talk about what that means for Minnesota families, workers, and then also the economy?
I was thinking about this today, and in the front row is my daughter and a bunch of her friends who are just graduating from college. And, so in a couple of different places when we think about the minimum wage, I think about the way Minnesotans are leading their lives. And certainly I grew up in a family that had the means, because my dad had a good job at General Motors, to be able to support themselves and five kids in a family. But times were tight sometimes, and I know my mom scrimped a lot to make sure that there was enough food on the table, and there was not, for many years, enough for extras. So when I think about where we are in time right now, school starting, families going to Target and they're purchasing school supplies, and if they're living paycheck to paycheck and they're not making ends meet week to week, those extras like tennis shoes and all the school supplies that you need to make sure your kid's getting a good education are hard to come by. And we knew and our caucus felt very strongly that one of the ways to make sure that we are investing in people's economic security is to make sure that hard work pays. And we fought for 2 years, but we did get that minimum wage increased, and it's going to increase over a number of years, and there's an inflationary tie to it. Because we think if you're going to go to work and work hard, it should pay off, and you should be able to support yourself. And it's a basic tenet of a strong economy in Minnesota, of a strong middle class, and we have more there to do. But I do want to give credit to Speaker Thiessen on this. When we were running in 2012, he sent me a book, and he's a voracious reader. I know that about him. And he sent me a book that was really talking about the workday lives of average people across the country and how hard it has become for people to get ahead. And I think, he led with that. He brought that agenda along with so many members of our caucus. And I do, while we're here today, want to give credit where credit is due for that, for setting that frame.
All right. Speaker Thiessen, we have the lowest unemployment rate in 7 years. Minneapolis and St. Paul is noted as having the lowest unemployment rate for a metropolitan area in the United States. One of the things that the legislature did to create jobs was the bonding bill. Could you tell folks what a bonding bill is and how it creates jobs?
Sure. Well, the bonding bill is, we have public buildings, roads and bridges, public infrastructure all across Minnesota that has to be maintained, and new stuff has to be built sometimes. And so our bonding bill is where the state borrows money, like you borrow money to pay for your house, invested in those projects that are going to have lives of 20, 30, 40, 50 years, and then see those projects come to fruition. And it's really good for building the strong infrastructure. And most of it goes to things like not exciting stuff, but roads and bridges and like wastewater infrastructure, our colleges and universities. These are the things that are the basis for our economy. Without them, we wouldn't have an economy. And so it's good in that sense. And it also puts a lot of people to work building these projects. And they're not government employees. These are private sector companies that bid to do this work. So it's a great way to invest in Minnesota, invest in our future. And we put together, I think, a very strong bill this year, including renovating our state capitol, which is going to be an amazing transformation. 100 years ago, 1895 to 1905, Minnesotans came together and said, we're a state that has great aspirations and we should have a capital that reflects that. And I think this now generation of Minnesotans needs to take the same step, and I think we took that step forward with that investment in our state capital to say, again, Minnesota is a place that believes in public service, that believes in our common good. But I do want to say one other thing, because you mentioned the economy, and that is, the fact is we do have a very strong economy here in Minnesota, leading indicators on many things, but there are a lot of folks, and the Republicans and Democrats both talk about this, who are underemployed, who aren't quite making it. And I think that is a really fair issue for people to be talking about this election. But I think the real point is to ask yourself which party has actually ideas that are going to fix that. And I think if you look at it, it really is the Democrats with the minimum wage that Erin talked about. I think the next thing she'll talk about around women's economic security, or get to that at some point, making sure women get paid the same, but also investments in early childhood education and job retraining. I mean, these are the things that are going to make sure that our economy is going to be great in the future, freezing college tuitions. And so I think as people ask that question, which is a very fair question, I think the answer is going to be, if you vote for a Democratic majority in Governor Dayton, you're going to see continued progress on that front.
Speaker Thiessen gave a little preview there. Next, I'm going to ask about the Women's Economic Security Act. That was also an important piece of legislation passed this past session. So share with us a few highlights and what it means for working women.
Women are, a major part of Minnesota's workforce and have increasingly become that over the last number of decades. And we have work to do in Minnesota and across the country, really, to make sure that work pays for women, that if we're going to go to work, when we're in the workforce, that we're being paid equally for comparable work. I don't know if you have seen the commentator, John Oliver, before. He's kind of funny, and he did an episode last week where he was talking about ladybucks. And we women earning ladybucks, they were pink, sort of smaller versions of a dollar bill, because we're still making a little less than a man does in the workforce. which was, a good tongue-in-cheek call to us to remind us that in work, especially in our childbearing years, that it's important to pay attention to the circumstances under which we are working and make sure that there's no discriminatory practices, that when we are deciding to have kids, when we're leaving the workforce, when we have our children, when we come back, that it's possible to do your job and do it well without any impediment from your employer, so that you can, leave work, take care of your children, come back, and earn comparable work. So the Women's Economic Security Act, which we call WESA, was the first installment of legislation to make sure that people are being paid equally, to make sure there aren't impediments in the workforce, to make sure that child care is affordable and available, so that women can compete in the workforce and they can earn for their families, knowing that when women are secure in the economy, their families are also secure in the economy. That's our basic fundamental value proposition. We know it to be the case. There's a lot of data to support it. It was a caucus-wide effort. We had a lot of authors that worked on the piece of legislation. Well, the speaker and I were very supportive of it, obviously. And, we got a lot of it passed, but we have more there to do as well. And one last thing I want to talk just a little bit about, because when we talk about women's economic security, we should also be remembering and talking a little bit about childbearing and child rearing, and making sure that we are doing that at our own time frame as women. And that's why the debate that we've been having this summer around contraception is important, because when we have our kids matters. When we have them, how far they're spaced out, that's important, and access to affordable contraception is a part of that, so we can control that. And the Supreme Court has made a decision that's going to make that a little bit harder. Speaker Thiessen and I and other members of our caucus are working on legislation to counter that. And I think that's also something we're going to take up in 2015 if we're fortunate enough to be put back into power by Minnesotans in the election this fall.
And since Israel has retracted their accusation that rockets came from the UNRWA shelter, how can we still support Israel when they are bombing shelters where people are going to avoid the bombs landing on their heads and their houses?
We'll get to a time for a question and answer.
Oh, okay.
So.
I didn't know you were going to have one. Sorry.
Yep. So we'll get to that.
All right.
Just one last thing. Speaker Thiessen doesn't maybe get a lot of attention, but very important. The DFL has worked hard to reestablish relationships with local
we kind of connected local units of government, cities, states, school districts as well, or cities and counties and school districts with the state. And that partnership that was so strong for many years and really set our state apart, we restored that by increasing what we call local government aid going to help those cities so they can hold property taxes down, but as important, provide the same kind of services in every part of the state that we get right here in Minneapolis and St. Paul. But the second thing, what's really important, I think, is that we also provided direct property tax relief to Minnesotans, to farmers, to homeowners, to renters. And as a result, this year we're going to see for the first time in 12 years actually a statewide decline in property taxes. So they're going to be going down about $50 million statewide. And I think that that's a great reversal, because what it says, and to a larger point, is that we were focusing on the taxpayers, middle-class taxpayers. And one kind of thing that's been hidden in a lot of the discussion you hear out there about taxes, A, where they went, which is to pay for education, but secondly, that more Minnesotans, after the tax change in the last 2 years, will actually see their taxes go down than we'll see their taxes go up. So if you make over $250,000 a year, and if you're a big corporation, you're going to see your taxes going up, and we won't shy away from that. But if you're a middle-class Minnesotan, more likely than not, your taxes are going down. And I think those are the right priorities for Minnesota.
So this November, we have an opportunity to re-elect Speaker Thiessen and Representative Murphy and their colleagues, as well as Governor Dayton and Senator Al Franken. So, Aaron and Paul, why should folks vote DFL this fall?
I have a lot of faith in the people of Minnesota. And I know that we have significant issues in front of us right here at home. And I understand that our legacy here in Minnesota is to make sure that we're making decisions, sacrifices sometimes, that propel our future for everybody. And I think elections, and I'm obviously a participant in elections and a believer in our ability to participate. It's part of our American democracy. It's our chance to set the course for the future. And the contrast this year, I think, between what we're offering, the Democrats, versus our colleagues, the Republicans, is pretty stark. And I'm hoping, Minnesotans vote for more progress. And I think about what we faced in 2011 and 2012 when the Republicans were in charge, especially that government shutdown. The Capitol was closed for 20 plus days. It's never happened before. It's the longest government shutdown in our history. Minnesotans weren't allowed in the Capitol. And the budget that resulted from that shutdown was one that we voted on after just a few hours, and not a lot of scrutiny on that budget because the government had been shut down. And that shouldn't happen. We shouldn't get to that point. And in the last election, Minnesotans sent in a legislature that was determined to balance that budget and get the work done with the people rather than get into that kind of ideological scrap. And that meant being thoughtful. It meant making decisions, and we did that. And I think that Minnesotans want that. I believe that they want that. And we have tough issues in front of us, and I think we need a smart legislature, along with Governor Dayton, to deal with that, to propel us into the future. So that's the choice, right? More ideological gridlock or progress for Minnesota. And I think Minnesotans will choose progress. I hope they do, and we're working hard to that end.
Yeah, well, I would echo everything Aaron said. I mean, I think that's exactly what it is. It's a choice, and as you look at the big issues that are coming, I mean, the fundamental issue we have in this country is how are we going to grow the middle class? Because that's how we grow our economy. And I don't think that there's any. Well, there is a debate to be had, I think, but it's a pretty clear debate, a stark choice. I mean, and I think the Democrats, if you look at where we put our priorities on education, on middle class tax relief, on workplace flexibility, making sure that women are paid the same as men. One of the most striking things on that, if you're a woman with the same education, you're likely to make $1.2 million less in your career than a man. And if you think of what that means for the retirement security, for your ability to send kids to college, I mean, that's a fundamental economic, middle class economic issue. And so the choice, I think, really is who's going to stand with the middle class this year. And I think our record over the last 2 years and what we're talking about going into the future, not just expanding on those things of workplace flexibility and education investments, but also making sure we take the next step, which is to reinvest in our infrastructure, in particular transportation. I think you're going to see Democrats have delivered. We have a record of delivering, and we'll continue to deliver on those things. And I hope, at the end of the day, what this comes down to is the choice people make on November 4th and before, because you can now vote much more easily by absentee ballot, so remember that. But if you show up on November 4th, you're going to have a voice in this. And the challenge we have is that in these non-presidential years, a lot less Minnesotans show up. And so fewer voices get to decide the future of our state. So going to vote on November 4th and making sure your friends and your neighbors show up as well is going to make a huge difference. But I'm very optimistic, just like Aaron is, about the future. And I think that we're on the right course, and we ought to be continuing that direction.
Did we have any questions about state issues before we close up today?
Is there any plan on the state level for dealing with increasing college costs and student loans? Maybe the event's like $40,000 if you graduate and then finding a job after that.
Yeah, well, a couple of things. We did, the last 2 years we froze tuition. So, for the folks that are in there right now, that helps. We hope to do that again and make another investment in that, plus the state grant program, which saved people about $750 a year, the additional money we put in that. So just in the college costs. Another thing that we did last year, and we want to look and see how it goes and maybe expand it, is allowing the state level for people to refinance through the state their loan. So you can get refinance at a lower interest rate. Which can help. And we're looking for more ideas about how to address that. But the other thing that I think is really important is that we create some good paying jobs, more and more good paying jobs, because that's the secret, right? You can pay off your debt if you're making an income. And I think that we're headed in the right direction there. But what that also requires is continued investment in really innovative companies, and we're investing in broadband across the state, so there's more opportunities across the state to grow those high-tech kind of jobs. But the state partnering with the private sector to do that, I think, is something that we need to keep thinking about and keep focusing on. And you know, the reality is, kind of the good news, is that we're starting to turn the corner, not just on our economy growing, but also the number of jobs that are out there versus the number of workers. And so that we're going to actually have a workforce shortage here in the next year or two starting, and that's going to give us a much better chance to do that. But if you have any ideas about how to address that, I would love to hear, because it's a huge problem, and we've done some stuff, but there's more hopefully we can do.
This is a state issue. The state of Minnesota is investing in the state of Israel using the retirement funds, which are subsidizing building light rail lines for Israeli-only people to ride on. So the land is being stolen from Palestinians, and they build the light rail like they did the freeway system. Then they won't allow the Palestinians to ride on this light rail, just like the freeway systems that they built that only allow the Jewish people on the freeways in the area. And is the state going to continue? Minnesota Break the Bonds actually tried suing the state to get it to divest from Israeli bonds, and so all your teachers are actually subsidizing an apartheid state in their transportation system there. Is the state of Minnesota going to continue doing this sort of thing?
Well, you know, we have, I think you raise a very fair point, and, you know, the good news in the United States and in Minnesota is that we're able to resolve a lot of those issues through the elections that are coming up as opposed to fighting with each other. You know, it's a complicated issue because we have a fiduciary duty to our retirees to make sure that they have a legitimate retirement.
The returns weren't that great for the state of Israel bonds. They were much better.
And I'm not an expert on that, but the reality is we do have that fiduciary duty, and we've turned that over to the managers at the State Investment Board to address those issues. I think that there's better ways for us to address the issue of Palestine and Israel, and I think hopefully the United States is making some progress in trying to bring some people together. What's happening right now over there is tragic, there's no question about it, but I'm not sure that that is the best way to address it.
Before we go, Paul and Aaron are going to share their favorite fair food.
All right, well, I love mini donuts and have since I was my son's age, so here we go.
I always want to try something new, but my favorite is the Pronto Pup, and it's right over there, and I'm going to have one yet today.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And for more information, go to www.dfl.org. Thanks.